So I will try to make sure that we have a little time left. But as I told these gentlemen before, you guys are here to hear them, and I would just like to hear them talk. So I will be as minimal as possible in these questions. But I do want to start with you, Corey, because I was, reading through Vibe last night, and I'm thinking, okay, I need you to explain to me and to us how you define the South, both geographically and culturally, and how much Black people and Black culture impact your definition of what the South is.
Yeah. So you came out the gates with like that's the book. I'll do the whole book trying to answer that question. But I think briefly, so my book is trying to locate where's the South. And so for me, where something is both about space and time. So when I say where's the South, I'm thinking about how close is the South today to what we would consider the old South or antebellum South. And so part of my claim is that I don't think we're that far from where we used to be, right? So part of me defining where the South is a critique on time and how we imagine, right, distance from a supposed past. And the other part, which I think is a little bit more complicated, is geographically, where's the South? And so I might be rigid and say, well, Florida, Miami ain't the South, but say Kentucky is. And then, but if you have these debates, what you get to see is when people say, where's the South? Or if a person argues that, say, Maryland is the South, they'll say, oh, Frederick Douglass. And we talk about relationality. And so for me, defining where the South is, I'm looking for a particular set of types of relationships and histories and how people look at each other, vibe with each other, and wave at each other. And so for me, the South is the place that birthed America. And I'm going to end it on this. So for me, the South is a place where race becomes prominent in the U.S. And Malcolm X says, well, if you below the Canadian border, you South, right? And so for me, South is a type of framework to make sense of the birth of this country. And that's kind of how I think about what the South is. And you can't tell that story without Black and indigenous folks.
So in this book, you say you're from North Carolina, and that's up south.
I'm up south. I'm up south, yeah.
So, BMIKE, you are a artist, Black man working and living in the deep South, not the South.
Okay.
What kind of themes are you exploring in your work, and how does the South itself and your Black maleness in the South inform those themes?
Yeah, I think as an artist, it's all about proximity. So I'm exploring first what's closest to me. So my framework is New Orleans, which is its own version, I think, of the South in a lot of ways. So my framework is New Orleans. My framework is as a Black man and all those things that are closest to me. I think what then I search for as an artist is where the bridges lie and where I can find collaboration, where I can find opportunities to see myself reflected in other stories, but also deeply trying to understand just everything, just exploring that curiosity. And I think for me, exploring the curiosity looks like trying to navigate history, trying to navigate stories that I find exciting, trying to navigate space, and understanding how political space is. And so I think those are the things that kind of are the dots on the map that guide me every time I'm trying to create, that keep me in check when I'm trying to create. I think there's a thin line between being a reflection, like Nina Simone said, being a reflection of the times, and also deeply being imaginative about what you want to see. And so I'm constantly trying to dance those lines.
So, Avery, you live and work in Chicago, which is just New Orleans and Mississippi transplanted.
All day. I'm trying to tell you. Malcolm X is right. Yeah. Canada is the only thing north of the Dixie line coming from a place like Chicago, right?
And it's really hard for me to describe you. I mean, people say poet, but you've completely challenged the boundaries of what poetry could possibly be. But you are just as prominent in spaces where it is not about poetry at all, but about other forms of art.
Right.
And I'm curious about how you see this kind of genre bending nature of what you do, and how that is in some ways an affront to how people think that artists should behave. Like you should concentrate and be one thing and be really great at the one thing, and how you seem to not obey those boundaries in any way.
Yeah, that obey word. We're just been bad all my life. No. I keep trying to tell folks, I grew up west side Chicago. My family is Baptist. And so my introduction to poetry or language comes with not just what was in the book, right? We're paying attention to what's the book because what this man in his robe is doing, or what the choir is doing, what the director is doing. And so it's all of these genres of expression that I'm introduced to language to. So storytelling starts with, I love the Lord, he heard my cry. And then everybody go, right? and it's not just like a story that I had, but it's a story that everybody else in the building has also, and then we share. And but at the same time, as a poet, understanding that I love the Lord, he heard my cry and pitied every groan. Long as I live, while trouble rise, I hasten unto his throne is a poem. Mm-hmm. Right? It rhymes. There's music in it, even if you just say it. Mm-hmm. Right? And so I'm not necessarily thinking I'm breaking rules, right? I just think I'm holding on to what was born in the middle of, right? And people tell you to break rules or will stay in one lane because they're trying to sell a thing, right? Mm-hmm. Right? Be an author over here. Be a musician over here because we're trying to sell a record. We're trying to sell a book, and that's when they tell you, pick one, right? You know, and I'm always like, I'm all. And they gonna have to deal with it everywhere. They gonna have to deal with it everywhere.
See, when you started singing, I almost like got my $5 folded up. Because I just knew the collection plate was about to come around.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So, Corey, okay, now this is a great segue into how music is a form of poetry, and you particularly are talking about trap music, which I always think of rap as our modern day poets. Like when 100 years from now, when people look back, they will just say these were poets. Yeah. They just happened to do it to music, and they were brilliant poets. How does music intersect with art and literature in ways that help to kind of bring it alive? I'll tell this one story before you answer that question. James Baldwin said when he was struggling to finish that first book, he went to Switzerland. Yeah. He said, white mountains, white people, and get away from everything, you know, and he said he took a typewriter and one Bessie Smith album. Yes, he did. Yeah. Because he wanted to remind himself of how he must have sounded as a child. Which I stole, so I made a soundtrack when I was writing my first book. I was like, oh, if James Baldwin could do it, I could. And it really does work because you remember things through music and you realize how connected your story is and also the craft of writing is through music. How does that make a connection for you?
And I'm looking at one of my students, Allison, who's taking my hip hop class, and part of when I think about, trap music, if we don't know, it's like Southern hip hop, like 808s, like hi-hats. We rapping about guns, drugs, robbing, scamming, right? And I get to teach that at Tulane University. And I think part of what I've seen people do is, I've pushed back against thinking about that in relationship to poetry. Not that it's not, but I think the university needed me to explain why this hood music is intellectually valid, as opposed to saying maybe even if hip hop ain't poetry, can we develop a new type of analysis of it? Where I think poetry has a type of institutional like value in the university. And then I think a lot of my earlier work, they wanted me to link this hood sound with something we already like valued. And so for me, it was like, well, I think there is a connection there, but I also think it's something about Southern 808s. It's something about the grittiness, the heaviness that ain't poetry, right? That does something just different. And so I typically think about and then going to like I think the bigger part of the question. So, and I guess I'm gonna answer with a story. So,
Come on, Jesus.
so I did my research in North Carolina, where I'm from, and my uncle was shot in a card game. And when I was driving to his funeral, right, I didn't want to hear gospel. I didn't want to hear a sad song. I wanted a sound that was just as angry as I was. I wanted something that can hold me and see me at the lowest moments of my life and validate that me being angry at the person that shot my uncle was an acceptable feeling. And so I think to the question, right, music, right, it reminds us that we're people. It reminds us about the messiness of it. It takes us to moments, and for me, trap music takes us to moments of violence, the heaviness of it all, right? But it also shows us something beyond it. And so, yeah, like thinking about Baldwin, and so for me, right, if I'm gonna go right, I'm taking like a Rod Wave album and like the younger, and I'm gonna listen to like the 808s and like a young black guy, right, rap about sad stuff, and that gets me in my mood. Yeah.
That's deep.
So BMIKE, you live here in New Orleans.
I do.
I believe is one of the cultural capitals of the country.
Yeah. Okay.
And I say that because culture kind of moves the city. It is one of the city's exports. And,
For sure.
But also because its culture is singular. Like it is, it has its own voice. It doesn't try to emulate any other city or any other place on the planet. It just is and is satisfied and celebrates its singularity. How does that weave itself into your work or influence it?
So many ways. I think, one, I understand that I would not be an artist had it not been for this city, for the communities that uplifted me, that thought I was interesting enough or doing something cool enough that they wanted to pour into. So I'm forever indebted to the city of New Orleans in that way. But I think what I learned from New Orleans as an artist was deeply about why you create. I think this is not the space, whether you critique it or not, I think there's a lot to critique about what I'm about to say, but this is not the space you go to cash in on your talent. This is not the space you go to transact on your talent, to say, hey, look, I can do this well, what you got for me? This is the space I think people do it despite that. I think they create here because it's who they are. It's the place that growing up here was 2 jobs and a hustle. And the hustle was always that art. It was always what you did creatively that you knew was just something that you can do, but it wasn't the thing that sustained you, unfortunately. So for me, what I learned from that was that why do you create outside of those reasons? Like, why do you do it outside of the things that people teach you? You're good at this, so go become big and famous or make all the money. Like, you're not gonna do that here, unfortunately. So you gotta figure out why you do it despite that. And so from those lessons, I learned what it's about to connect with community, to think about how what I create is a tool for community. It's a function. It has usefulness. It has a certain purpose that's outside of the shining aspect of it. You know, it has a function, and I think that's why the best musicians understand that here, the best chefs understand that here, the best performers understand it here. They understand that what they do is a means to connect them with everyone else. And so learning that as a child, as a person growing up here, was a part of what taught me of what it looked like to be an artist. I always used to say, I didn't know what it looked like to be an artist, but as I got older, I realized I did. I just didn't understand what it looked like from the viewpoint of like the Hollywood nature of it, but I deeply understood it from what it means as a person in New Orleans, to say, the artist is the one that's gonna help us understand what it means to feel human or to survive, to understand that even despite all the things in this city that we can critique, we still love it because of the artist showing us all the things that are beautiful. And so that's how New Orleans shows up for me, and that's how I hope that I represent New Orleans to the folks who pay attention.
That's dope.
So,
That's dope.
yes, please.
Thank you.
Avery, let me touch the third rail of art now.
Okay.
which is something that I talk to a lot of famous artists about, which is they believe that they are creating for their community and to express themselves fully and to reflect their community, but their art is not consumed by their community, but by other people. Right? If they create physical art, it is not. It's rarely bought by Black people. If they do performance art, the audience they look out at don't have as many Black faces as they would like to have. If you're doing public art, it's different because you can place public art where the community can consume it and see it. But if you're not, how do you wrestle with that when you are so clearly producing art out of Black experience?
Yes.
And wanting to give that as a gift to Black people in addition to everybody else.
Right.
But that's not always how it works out on the receiving end.
Again, I'm not necessarily wrestling with anything. I grew up Baptist. When it says those who ever will, let them come. So that part of it is already in my juggler, I guess. But I also understand that community is a bunch of things. There's community, which is about address, your area code, and your neighbors, right? And then there's community as your tribe. And that's what I'm learning and walking through life and going to different places, being an artist and things of that nature. Oh, that's every fucking where. And because it's everywhere, the audience changes. And the color of the audience is also is about the accessibility and the comfortability. It is, I'm performing somewhere where Black folk don't feel comfortable being, and not necessarily the ability to get there, right? It's when I'm performing at the MCA, the Black people will show up, or people who are comfortable going to the MCA, right? When I'm performing at the Garfield Conservatory, which is like on the corner of the hood, Black folk are there because Black folk across the street. And they walk over across the street and they get what they get when they come across the street. So I'm cool because I understand community to be various things. I don't necessarily wrestle with this idea that I'm making art that wouldn't necessarily be accessible based upon where it's actually being presented, right? Because again, I am intentional in where I am, right? And that I get to go here, and I'm making sure that I'm there. I'm not necessarily comfortable in a lot of spaces where, well, it used to be, I can't say that now, because I then made a decision that I'm going to enter every space myself and my whole self, right? But I used to be uncomfortable if I was in a space and it seemed like, nah, Avery, you can't do that there, right?
What does that mean? What would give you the feeling that
so
you couldn't do?
So there's a piece I have called Emmett Till, the Remix. And it's a story that, well, the way in which it's shaped, I am taking the story of Emmett Till and the story of Jesus' crucifixion and were you there when they crucified, and I merge them, right? And there's spaces where I would perform it, and people were with me, and there's spaces where I was performing and people looking at me, right? And I was uncomfortable with being looked at, right? Right? Going through the story with me is a totally different thing, especially with that particular story. And so, but I understood, or came to the understanding, that me being thought I was looked at was something going on with me, not necessarily people, right? And the adjustment would, well, dude, if you gonna tell it, tell it. And you get it to tell it any and everywhere. And so the adjustment was being, okay, well, I'm going to enter each space my full self. So I'm not wrestling with this expression. You get what you get. I got sweet potato pie in me. It ain't no point. Do I feel like I got to turn it into collard greens? or caviar, right? Or hummus. You know what I'm saying? You know, gonna take these chilies and Mary Booker clean, boiled, and throw some pepper and onion in. And I'm gonna rock with it everywhere. I'm gonna rock with it everywhere because that's the work. That's the work for me. The work for me. All that then, who get to see it? People in suits figure that out for me. Mm-hmm. Right? People in suits figure that out. Mm. I just show up. Okay.
So Corey, you have somehow figured out a way to loop in mass incarceration into this, into this conversation, and how it also impacts us, identity, culture, community.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So for my work is ethnography. So I spent 4 years living with the artists, and most people's day-to-day lives isn't the music, right? You got 2 jobs and a hustle. And so what you grow to realize, so a story could be, so I was a researcher, so I'm just kind of like, I ain't got a job, like the university paying for me to be there. And so like I would watch people's like kids. And then I went to Walmart with she was 13 years old then, and I didn't see anything I wanted. And I was walking out of Walmart, and she was like, "You're not gonna buy anything?" And I was like, "No, I don't see anything." And she was like, "But what if they think we stealing?" And then so for me, she needed to perform a type of innocence to where even absence of like a police officer or any type of like carceral thing, the criminal justice system was doing a type of work on this little black girl. And so for me, so I'm thinking about music and emotions. And so I'm trying to have a conversation that the prison ain't just about locking us in cages and shooting us on the street. But what happens minute by minute, day by day, is us wrestling with how this system makes us feel like our skin is heavier than what it is just because it's dark. And trying then to say it's not just about incarceration rate numbers, because even though those numbers are decreasing, Black people still are uneasy in this country. And so I'm trying then to tell a conversation about, one, the rise of hip hop and the rise of mass incarceration coincide with each other, right? Not saying that hip hop produced it, but they developed at a similar moment in time. And thinking about, if we value hood Black people, if we could step back and say, maybe those people in the hood might know something I don't know, could they build knowledge about political systems, about incarceration systems? And so for me then, kind of seeing how they do life and talk about life, how their bodies move through spaces, right? You can't help but realize that the criminal justice system does an intimate type of emotional work on Black folks. And so for me, while the music is dope, I didn't want people to get lost in the spectacle of that. I wanted it to be about, yeah, like the music, we vibe with it, but underneath that sound, right? If we can get to the softest parts of people who rap about dangerous things, people are scared, timid, and it's usually the criminal justice system and the many ways it shows up that's doing that type of work.
Let me ask you a question. So in that little girl's story, that example, does that mean, and I know that I am not the only person who has done this. I had to catch myself in my 40s still doing this. If I were not dressed appropriately, I would not go to certain stores. I felt like, you know, I'd be watched. They wouldn't assume that I was up to something. And because normally I'm just in a hoodie and some jeans. And there were stores that I would not go into because I had on my hoodie and my jeans, even though other people could do that and would feel no way about it. Is all of that part of what the system of incarceration is doing to us? Yeah,
because that's a type of, so the incarceration system, what it does is surveil, contain, and police, right? And then so that's a type of surveillance to where you're already anticipating a type of eye on you. And so you're responding to it. And sometimes we do it so often that we don't even think about it. Where it's like, what am I coming there? Like, I'm gonna wear some sneakers, but let me wear some like casual pants. So like, I don't look black, but I still look black, but like a smart black guy. And like, I might do it so quickly, and it's still me responding to a type of carceral experience. And yeah, and I think some people might call it code switching, but for me, I don't think that gets to it. Cause like everybody code switches. But I think the difference is our lives are at stake with it, where we can materially lose things and lose our bodies.
I just remember growing up in Chicago, and I was telling this to somebody the other day, and we would go downtown to see the Carson Pier Scott window, and Big Mom make us dress up like we going to church. And I'm like, why we dress up like we going to church? Go see stuff in the window, right? But we would. But I realized she comes from 1923, 1930, 1940, Lexington, Mississippi. And going into town is a whole other ritual for her. And which I believe at some point is also in this psychology of looking like you belong, or some level of dignity and respect. And I live in the liberty where I'm not necessarily looking like, I'm not carrying that, because that's a lot to carry. And it's heavy. And I remember something that you said earlier about going into your uncle's funeral. And a lot of times the black folks, sad and mad, are identical twins. They're not necessarily that far apart from each other. You sad, and so you get mad, and you mad, which makes you sad. I say that to say, when Thomas Dorsey writes, "Precious Lord, take my hand," he's not just sad that he's lost a wife and a child. He's mad he's lost a wife and a child. And I gotta do anything else, Jesus. You gotta take my hand. Cause I ain't here for this no more. Right? And we live, a lot of us live like that. I ain't in here no more for that. And so something in me had to just go, hey, if you're gonna put on a hoodie and some jeans and you're gonna go to the Balenciaga store, do it in your hoodie and jeans. They sell hoodie and jeans at the Balenciaga store. Right? What I got on a suit for? So I mean, there's a Harriet Tubman didn't run to freedom. She ran because she was free already. The space was just, can I get my body somewhere where my brain and spirit is?
Sync up.
Right? Can I get there? And I think one of the cool things about being a creative and being an artist and navigating through this thing about like art and who you're in front of and all that other stuff is, like, personally, I've been just making sure when I'm somewhere, I'm synced. All of that, you know? And it's working, boo.
That's real.
It's working.
Every time you speak, it's performance.
I know. I grew up look, I told you, Baptist church. I don't know it no other way.
So, B-Mike, we were just discussing, I was trying to figure out if I had seen some of your art in public space. I can't be sure that I have. I think I might not have mentioned one place that I've been that I might have seen it, but I did look at some of your work online and talk about how, what the other panelists have talked about, which is the importance of portraying in art the everydayness of Black people.
Yeah, for sure.
And making that and forcing people to engage with those people and not pathologize that image and to just see them as people.
Right. Well, 2 points I want to make from the earlier point. My homies and I, we used to always, it was a joke, but it was for real. We used to always have reading glasses in our car. So if we ever got pulled over, we could put them on to look less intimidating. You know, and it was something we joked about, but it was like real. I still have some in my car today.
I'm a thug mine on. I look dangerous.
And then the other point about audience is such an interesting, like, I'm so curious about that, and I've always been. And I think there's a thought about the responsibility of that in terms of, I understood a long time ago that my work was able to go places where people weren't ready for me to be yet. And when we think about all of us, whatever bubbles we project to protect us from the unknown or what we're afraid of, the first things we let pierce the bubble is the art, it's the food, it's the cinema, it's the literature. Those are the first things we let in. And so for me, it was always a curiosity point about, what do I do with that? Like, okay, if my work is gonna pierce the bubble first, how can I make sure that there's some responsibility with that? Or as a professor told me a long time ago, he said, when I walk in the room, my race walks with me. And so I always thought about those things like, oh, okay, that's weight. And we could debate like whether that's appropriate or whether we should just shed that. But I do understand that weight to be important. But to your question about portrayals, I think I've gone through a lot of phases. Early on, it was like halos and crowns, and it was really about projecting this sense of value, like forcing it. And then I had a homie of mine, a mentor of mine, and I had this great idea, I thought, because my background is in like music videos and filmmaking and all that stuff. So I was pitching this idea to him, and he's a very well-known artist, and I was like, yo, I want to do this music video where we're in the hood and we put these thrones everywhere, and we just have people sitting in the thrones and just get this B-roll of everybody. And I'm thinking it's going to be like, oh, this is beautiful. And he was like, nah, that's not it. And I was like, what you mean? He said, why at the expense of feeling less than human do we have to assert a superhumanity? Why do I have to be a god or a king just for you to see value in me? And that really started to play with the way I projected images. I was like, yo, I don't need to be doing all this extra to make somebody look at me and say, oh, okay, you're beautiful. It's like I could just project you in the everyday and the mundane. And so that's what I've been trying to do more of, is just, like you say, that just the everyday, allowing people to see the beauty. And I paint somebody 50 feet tall, and the first question is, well, who is that? And I'm like, does it really matter? Like, that's a person, they're valuable, they exist, they love, they dream. And so that's what I try to do. Sometimes it's a challenge, but the goal is to apply my art into this portrayal of the everyday in a way that makes all of us understand that not only is that beautiful, but this space is beautiful because of it. And yeah, that's the short of it.
So we have a little bit less than 10 minutes. I want people to line up at the mics if you have a question, line up at the mics there on either side of the room. And while you guys line up, I want to ask you both, Corey and Avery, to chime in on that as well. I mean, I am endlessly fascinated by Black people being allowed to claim the same humanity that everyone else is allowed to claim without exerting extra effort. Right. This idea, Maya Angelou once said, like, because I'm human, nothing can be foreign to me. That was, to me, a driving force in writing my first book. Like, I was like, these are just poor people from the South. Nobody knows them, but I'm going to make you see them, because you must. When I confront you with them, then you must see them, because you're a human being, and that's a human being. But how much of that, I want to respond to what BMIKE was saying about how much of that are we forcing and having to force?
I think we have to unteach ourselves by telling our children they have to be better. Because that's where that comes from. You got to be better than everybody so people will see you on the same level. And I've lived long enough to understand that it don't take much to be that better. It really don't. It don't really take that much to be better than an Uncola. It really don't. But because when you say that, you're saying to your child, you're not enough as you are. That's what you're saying to your child. And so we gotta stop that. I mean, that's the thing that went in me as a little, like a 8, 9 years old. Oh, wait, hold up. Why we in suits and ties just to walk downtown? We clean? Well, you make sure that when we woke up this morning, we had to go in the bathroom, you know what I'm saying? And so we gotta stop we gotta stop giving, and I'm talking to black people, because it's a lot of y'all in here. Black people gotta stop telling, especially they babies, giving them this assignment that you gotta be better than white people, right? Because honestly, it's more than white people up in this motherfucker. And they can't be the epitome. They can't. I'm trying to tell you. I searched all over, couldn't find one. Couldn't find not one. That is the epitome of whatever this humanity thing is. So we gotta stop doing that. We stop doing that to each other. And I'm gonna say that, then we understand then the value in is breath, right? The fact that I woke up this morning clothed in my right mind is value. And if I wake up tomorrow and ain't so clothed, that's all right too. That's all right too.
You coming real further back down south with.
Come on now, I try to tell you.
Clothed in my right mind.
Come on now,
that's
I'm trying to
language.
tell you.
I want to go get this question on the side of the room.
Thank y'all so much for being here. I am Miss TK from KLA 6th grade English representing. I have some young creative writers with us who are very excited to hear from y'all, and I would like to know what words of advice do you have for young creative voices who are limited to the institutions, those places that don't see all of our value. What can the educators do to pull on those minds in 2024 and to make sure that they don't lose their light?
Who wants to take that one? The educator?
Okay.
The educator.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say, come real authentic, and because I know people ask me like, hey, can you do like a hip hop lesson for the students, or can you train me how to do hip hop with kids? I'm like, why? Like, if you play the ukulele, do that, and they'll add the beat to it, they'll add the rhythm to it, and I think students care about sincerity, where just come in there as you are, like be real with it. And then, so yeah. And then, but I think more pointed towards the question, I'll say, don't let school discipline you out of you. To where when I started writing my book, I had to remember what my grandma's voice sounded like for me to write a Black Southern book. And where 12 years of university, I forgot what she sounded like. And then, so don't let your education, right, undermine all the things your granny taught you, undermine like what you see in your neighborhood. Like, that's education. And I'll say, hey, you just gotta find a way to kind of tinker it and like make it work, right? And then audience, like if you're trying to sell stuff, shoot, don't even worry about that part of it. Just do you. And yeah, and I'll try to, that's what I would tell my younger self.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to this side.
So I don't have a question as much as a comment. I just want to thank you, beautiful men, for showing up in your whole selves. As a child of the 70s, and I'm the last of the baby boomers, so I'm about to turn 60. So that code switching, that code switching and that, being better and feeling comfortable in spaces. I just want to appreciate that you guys have not necessarily, you've grown above the struggle that older generations had to do. So thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think my question is, thank you all for being here. One, my question, I guess, is more for you, BMIKE, because Dr. Miles, I'll ask you a question on Tuesday if I've had anything come to mind. But I'm in another class with that's on music in New Orleans this semester, and like Dr. Miles also knows this professor, but he's been really good about hammering home the fact that like we have to kind of think about like the carceral state when talking about New Orleans art. So I'm just kind of thinking about like I mean, I've seen your art before. I'm a senior at Tulane. I was a freshman when you had your exhibit at Newcomb Gallery, and I loved it, and I've been following your work since.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking about like what your thought, like how you talk about like mass incarceration and carcerality in your artwork, and like what kind of comes to mind for you when you're making this art, when you're making your artwork and thinking about New Orleans and the amount of incarceration that happens in the city?
Yeah, no, definitely. I appreciate the question. I think the quick way to answer, at the studio right now, in the third space, the third bay, there's a exhibit up right now called Radical Freedom Dream. And it's inspired by Robin D.G. Kelly's book, Freedom Dream. And with that, I think for me, the main goal of an artist is to imagine alternatives to the present. I think when you broaden the scope of, when you look at that definition, you broaden the scope of what it means to be an artist. Because I think many people are engaging in that work of what it means to imagine alternatives to the present. And I think, so for me as an artist, is constantly trying to navigate and explore my radical imagination to think about alternatives, because all those things are a residual impact of someone else's imagination. Someone imagined that these things were to be true, and we are now, at years and years later, trying to break ourselves out of that. To me, what's necessary to do that in the most effective way is a radical imagination to counter what I feel is a evil imagination. And so, imagine alternatives to the present. You're engaging in that work in school. I think all of us are trying to figure that out, and that's what I try to do as well. So, definitely.
So I have a minute and 30 seconds. I want to ask if the two people, if you can both ask questions, and we'll see if we can get one of the answers or both the answers in before this is over. So go ahead and ask your question. You have your question.
All right, perfect. How y'all doing? My name's Mikey. I'm a student of Professor Miles. I took his class last semester. I just want to say really quick, I don't know if there are any other Tulane students in the crowd that haven't taken his class, but if you guys really want to challenge your perspective, I would say that he's arguably the best professor at Tulane. And out of any class that I've taken, this is the one class where I feel like I've really learned more beyond the scope of education. So, thank you.
Okay, fine. I'm signing up. Fine, I'll take it.
Okay, so
Tell them to give me a raise too.
Throw that part out.
yeah, so I just wanted to touch on something and try to get you guys just to dig a little deeper on something that you were touching on throughout the panel. And BMIKE, I just want to bring up a quote and something that I really paid attention to, something that just really stuck with me. And you said something along the lines of that you understood that your work was going to go places and reach people that weren't prepared or ready to react appropriately. And again, we also touched on sort of attire and how, how we dress really says a lot about how comfortable we are. And I think like when you look around today during the book
we have about
festival,
30 seconds
or
left.
at a place like Tulane, the clothing that we're wearing, it clearly tells the story that we aren't,
It goes so fast.
this is an institution that's affecting the conversations that we're having and the discussions that we're having. So how exactly at a place like Tulane, when you're having discussions about Black culture, can you say better prepare an audience that isn't necessarily in the position to react or understand it to better understand it?
So I'm going to have BMIKE answer that question to you offline, because the question took up all the time we have. And this is like the Apollo. They will yank me off of here with a thing. So this is all the time we had. I want to give our panel a round of applause.